I know we're starting later than we had expected to, so I'll just do a very brief framing and make a couple of points before we hand it over to the Malone and McBroom team. So first of all, I want to say that I think you've all seen the proposals by now. 3 of you serve on the Equity 2020 committee. I know Mr. Brescia made it the other night, as did Ms. Taylor. So the purpose tonight is to go into a little more depth about how the team arrived at the proposals. Again, I want to make the point and echo what Mr. Waring, Chairman Waring, has said. This is a starting point. It was always designed that way, and it will continue to be that way. This is not the ending point. This is the beginning. We always designed it to have outside expertise, people who can look at long-term enrollment projections, which is what the team did. Headline, our enrollment is declining, and it will continue to decline. That was the first focus of Equity 2020. The second thing we asked them to do was to take a look at the capacity and the utilization of our buildings. Headline, most of our buildings are underutilized and under capacity. The Equity 2020 team also asked our colleagues at Malone and McBroom to look at school performance, which they did with data we gave them. We asked them to look at conditions of buildings in a city now where you know that the bond rating has yet again been downgraded, so it's not looking hopeful that we will get any buildings renovated anytime soon other than the Weaver project, which is a $100 million investment in the North End, and the repurposing of the modernized JMA building, the Barber Street School, which will be repurposed in the Northeast to a neighborhood school. So I just want to note that, but we did ask the team to look at conditions of buildings. The Equity 2020 team also asked, in addition to performance, to consider need and concentration of need in buildings. So they added that into their analysis as well. And we combined all that together and arrived at the scenarios. That was always the plan. That was always the plan that we presented to the advisory team, that we would work in that sequence. We asked their advice for more criteria with which to narrow down the focus. The Equity 2020 team has always said that this is about quality, and so we've looked at those factors, and we're looking at how we can maximize access to quality seats. We have a number of quality seats, higher performing neighborhood schools, magnet schools, and so the purpose here is to say, how do we increase access to higher quality seats and maximize and optimize our resources? I would just say, again, very briefly, and I'll wrap up and let our team here from Malone and McBroom get into the analysis more in depth and how they arrived at the proposals. But, you know, this is not new. I was going to say I knew it 2 years ago when I came in and the transition team said, you need to consider the fact that you have added schools and programs in a time of declining resources when you've been flat funded. At that point, it was flat funding. It's declined now. The city did not meet MBR last year, and the state cut our ECS and other funds. So we're not in a flat funding scenario anymore either. We're in an era of declining revenue. So it's gotten worse since the transition report came out. But at that time, they said, you need to look at the fact that you've added schools and programs when your revenue has been flat. There also was a strong point about conditions of buildings and that students need to be in decent, beautiful environments, that it does, in fact, impact learning. So we knew it 2 years ago, but apparently from the woman who came from public comment, we knew it 20 years ago. So this is a long time coming, and it's not easy, right? We know that. The last thing I'll say, and before I hand it over to the team, is that we always designed the process to have outside expertise. None of us can crunch the numbers on enrollment projections and do very detailed utilization analyses and then, you know, see what you see. Put possibilities in front of us, possibilities. We also always designed a second component, which was to get Hartford context and Hartford input. We know what you're seeing tonight is just one part of the process and one part of the equation. The next part, and it's always been designed this way, is to get extensive input that provides Hartford knowledge from Hartford families and staff and community members. And in fact, tomorrow, you heard Millie Arceniegas allude to this, that we have asked school teams from every one of our schools to bring parent leaders and staff to give us input. And we have, 300 people signed up. We had about 75 people at the Equity 2020, and we will continue. We've done outreach to NRZs. We will continue to have opportunities, because what you see tonight is not the final proposal. We have always intended for you to see refined proposals that have changed because of community input. We looked at the Washington, D.C. model early on, and we said we want to follow that model because it showed how community input affected the proposals. Okay. So I just wanted to give some important context to the process, to what we've said we were going to do, and to what's coming next. I want to acknowledge Jose Colon Rivas's leadership. He has been managing and leading the Equity 2020 process since he came on as the COO of the district. So I wanted to put that out there and thank him for his management and his leadership of this process. Jose, have I forgotten any context that needs to be said?
I've included everything.
Okay. With that, we'll hand it over to our colleagues at Malone and McBroom to walk you through what they found when they dug into the data, and how they arrived at the proposals.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Auger with Malone and McBroom. With me tonight is Mike Zuba, also from Malone and McBroom, and Kemp Morhart from SLAM, who collaborated with us on this project. What we're going to go through tonight, again, is the process by which we arrived at the proposals that have been shown and were unveiled last week. We're going to touch on the final building capacity numbers that we arrived at, as well as the projected utilization. Going to go into a little bit more in depth than the superintendent just did on the criteria that were developed by the Equity 2020 committee that really drove the proposals that are in front of you tonight, and talk a little bit about the next steps.
I'm touching on the timeline. We're about in month 7 of the process. We started off in April with our first Equity 2020 meeting. At that kickoff meeting, we thought it was very important to be able to get a feel for what some of the issues are, really getting to know not only the members, but what they see as some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So we spent a good portion of that workshop dedicated to going through a SWOT analysis, just to be able to flesh out some ideas. The ideas that are things that we want to build upon and things we want to address as part of this larger plan. Some things that really popped to the top, looking at, what are the good things that are happening here, very innovative, creative themes, many options for parents and children in the school system. There are new buildings, there are very strong corporate and institutional partnerships in place there. Those rose to the top of our list. What were some of the weaknesses and concerns? Well, the cost of operating small schools, how much longer can it continue? We had great disparity between buildings, some new buildings versus buildings that were in various states of disrepair and really needed some attention. That was hindering education. There were many opportunities, ability to better utilize the resources, as the superintendent mentioned, the funding and all of the closures that never happened. That was really on sort of the minds of the committee members and saying, we know we want to do things additional educationally, but do we have the resources to be able to do that? And really being able to replicate those successes that were throughout the district, those higher performing schools, how best to be able to take those models and be able to bring those down and make them available for everyone. One of the major threats, which really kind of led into a lot of what we've inputted in our criteria, was really the lack of funding, the uncertainty of the future. Where was the state of ECS? Where's the state of grant funding for school construction projects? So with that information, we were able to really get a good feel for what was going on and help get the framework or begin to establish the thought process and working towards, what are the criteria? What are we trying to accomplish as part of this? In our May meeting, we really focused the meeting on being able to look at other precedents, look at other school systems who are going through a similar type of process with declining enrollment. Where are they at? And there were many examples out there. There were some within our own state, but we really looked to those models that were being put in place in DC, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston. And we'll touch on a little more of what their triggers were as a percent utilization before they began working in the plan, and what some of their targets were. In our June meeting, that meeting was twofold. It was not only to educate the committee and being able to get out those enrollment projections, looking at enrollment not only for the district as a whole, but those factors that fed into our projections, where we see housing, where we see the demographics, looking at birth rates, and then being able to disaggregate that into the various zones and develop projections for essentially the neighborhood level components. The back half of the meeting really focused on the criteria. We began putting the bones in place as a committee, identifying those driving factors. If we're going to be putting out proposals, what are those proposals going to be weighed against? What are the options? What are we trying to accomplish with it, so that we have some sort of scoring and benchmark for those to ensure that we're actually meeting what our intended goal was. Moving forward into our July workshop, we began talking about capacity. A large amount of work went into being able to establish the framework of what the operational capacity of the building is. At that meeting as well, we talked about public engagement, and this is where this two-part process really began involving in the consultant's role versus the district's role, and how all of this was going to work hand in hand and move forward over the next several months. At our following meeting in August, we had, from the request of the committee members, it was really, they wanted to know a deeper dive on the zonal analysis, as we'll call it, where we really looked at the number of students enrolled in each of the zones, where they were going to school, whether it was within the district, whether it was choice, whether it was a neighborhood school, opting into CREC or some other out-of-district option, to really look at the flow of students. We knew the total number of students there, we know the projected number of students there, but really to be able to look at the movement of students, whether it's option-driven, whether it's choice-driven, to begin getting into the dynamics of each of these separate areas. And then working our way through the back half of the summer into the early fall, into where we presented last week, was getting into the options, being able to put proposals together, look at what the proposals are based on all of this information that we have, in order to start the discussion. The intent of the proposals is you have to start somewhere to have the discussion. So by presenting 3 different proposals, we wanted to use that as a discussion starter. And where we see ourselves today here, presenting our update to the board, as well as moving towards a November recommendation from our work on this as a consultant, and then for the school district to take it on there through the next steps. Touching on building capacity, our task was very, very complex, in that a number of schools operating in various ways, schools of various vintages that have different programmatic needs. So what we did was we wanted to be able to rely on the educators, the building leadership, to help understand how they're using the space. So we went through an exercise of, looking at floor plans, marking up floor plans, getting input then from leadership, and working with the facilities department to help address any questions that we had, to where we can develop a usable and established capacity for the buildings. We took a 2-pronged approach. This was all led through the SLAM collaborative of both looking at space standards and developing capacity by space, while also looking at your class size guidelines, and then blending those two together to come up with an operational or a planning capacity. What I want to point out, which is very important, is that these are governed totally by your class size guidelines. Any proposal in here will not exceed those class size guidelines, and within our planning numbers, we have also built in some headroom, we'll call it, where it's an efficiency factor. So for those schools that are magnet schools, or schools that house upper level grades where scheduling is really dependent on the use of the building, we used a much higher efficiency factor for those schools of, say, 95%. For those neighborhood schools that group by a geographic component are at the whim of the population of bubbles and troughs there through the demographics, we used a lower factor of 85% there, and those numbers are bore out of our experience in working in other school systems across the state of Connecticut, what we actually see in these type of buildings. So it's really the effective utilization of the buildings from a very large sample of public schools elsewhere. Putting all of that information together, we were able to establish a capacity. So that's really our target for this study. So getting into sort of the nuts and bolts of it, overall for the district, we have a utilization of 73%. So for the 22,000 students that were reported in 15-16, we have 30,000 plus seats, resulting in that number. And then we began breaking it down by zone, and later we broke it down by each individual building. Zone 1 is operating at about 60%, so many more seats relative to the number of students that are attending school in those schools in that zone. Zone 2 at about 68%. So the two northern zones in our study area are trailing, and those have the least overall effective utilization. Moving down towards the south in zone 3 and 4, you're getting closer to what an acceptable benchmark is of about 82% there, but still not anywhere near where you need to be for targeting utilization. What we wanted to do was to provide a little context to it. So what does 73% really mean? And the first three are our firsthand experience with clients we've had over the last several years. Waterbury, just looking at their pre-K-8 overall, was operating at about 109%. Norwalk, 102% for the elementary, and about 96% for the middle schools. And Stanford had similar numbers of about 98% for the elementary. Their bubbles hadn't gone through the middle yet, so there's that number of about 80%. But overall, for a district, they were very highly utilized. And tying that back into those case studies that we had, really looking at those other precedents that were set. Baltimore Public Schools operating at about 79 to 80%. That prior to their consolidation, prompting for a call to be able to get up to 86%. Washington, D.C. operating at 72% prior to going through their consolidation plan with the goal of getting upwards of the mid 80%. Philadelphia Public Schools operating at under 70%, and Boston Public Schools also operating under 78%. So looking at that threshold of what triggered going through a very similar process that we are in the midst of today, they're all very similar numbers that align with where Hartford is at today. Touching on our enrollment projections, we go through a very thorough process to be able to generate projections. We wanted to be able to look at not only the resident component, but the non-resident component, and we began looking at the region as a whole. Overall, what we're seeing is over the next 5 years, about a 10% decline for the Hartford Public Schools overall, with the resident component dropping about 13%. That 10% decline total is offset by bringing in out-of-district students, but overall what we're looking at for the plan and our planning scenarios is looking at that 10% decline over the next 5 years. When we begin looking ahead and tying it to our future utilization, the numbers change slightly, and what changes here in 1920 is working off of the assumption that Weaver construction project will be complete, phasing out of culinary, a shifting of seats. So overall in zone 1, you're going to get a gain in efficiency there. And I think that's important. Just through the restructuring of seats and the construction program, you're getting to about 83% efficiency. But you're going to see a drop off in zones 3 and 4, and that's largely due to the decline in enrollment at the high school level in the two large high schools. But when we take a step back and look at it, and even with the Weaver project and the consolidation, we're still chasing that declining enrollment overall. And overall, we're at about 72% going out into 1920 with the reduction in the total number of seats there. I'll pass it to Rebecca now, who's going to walk us through the evaluation criteria.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, as the superintendent alluded to earlier, the Equity 2020 Committee had a couple of different conversations about essentially its mission, its charge from the district, as well as its goals and criteria moving forward. And really, the mission of the committee boiled down to the tagline at the bottom of the screen: to improve quality seats and maximize resources and opportunities for students. That really was the charge that the committee took on. When we were first brought on to the project, we were given the charge to really take a look at facilities and utilization and come up with a facilities long-range plan. The committee, through the course of their discussions, really added that school performance and student need criteria to the mix. And when we took all of the data and information that we had collected and analyzed over the summer and wanted to start on developing proposals, we needed a place to start. We needed a way to benchmark your portfolio of schools against each other. And using the committee's criteria, we developed a a rating matrix, essentially, that I'm going to show you in a minute, but I want to talk to you about the factors that are a part of that rating system. So first, again, because our initial charge really was facilities-based, we looked at facility conditions. And the way we went about this was we took a look at the 2014 facilities study that was done for the district. And in that report, each building was looked at, its mechanicals and building components were all evaluated and assessed for needs, and costs were associated with those needs. We took a look at that, but we also dealt quite extensively with your facilities department to get a better understanding of what's happened in the couple of years since that report was issued, as well as how buildings are operating currently to assess their real true ranking of needs for each facility. So we assigned a ranking system of 1 through 5, where schools that were ranked a 1 indicated the best conditions and 5 indicated the worst conditions with gradations in between. For school performance, we looked at 2 different measures. For elementary and middle school students, we looked at Smarter Balance testing results. We took a 2-year average of the percent of students that were meeting or exceeding level 3, and we assigned, we put all of the percentages together by school, and we broke it down into 30th percentiles. So schools ranking in the highest 30th percentile were ranked A1. Those in the lowest 30th percentile were ranked A3. For high schoolers, we took a look at last year's SAT results. And again, we broke it down, every school against each other, into 30th percentiles, with the highest performing ranked a 1, the lowest performing ranked a 3. To have any kind of metric for student need, we relied on direct certified students associated with free and reduced lunch needs as a percentage of total enrollment by school. And again, we broke it down into a 30th percentile distribution, with the lowest ranking of need being a rank 1. The greatest concentration of need within a school building was ranked 3. Those 3 factors were summarized together to come up with our summary score, which I'll show you in a moment. And as you can tell, because we ranked facility conditions on a 1 through 5 scale and the other 2 on a 1 through 3 scale, we weighted the facilities conditions in our ranking. Utilization was also an important factor, but there are many different reasons why a building may be under enrolled, having to do with programming and other issues, so we didn't feel it could weight into our summary ranking. However, it was important for us to be cognizant of it as we were looking at all buildings compared against one another. So those 4 factors are shown in the evaluation criteria matrix that we have before you, and all buildings are shown. And those ranking with the highest summary score are those that have the greatest need or are basically not performing against the committee's criteria as they were established. And so those were the schools that we targeted for improving access to quality seats in the proposals that you're about to see. So many of the schools show up in most of the proposals. Many of the top 5 schools show up in most of the proposals that we have put forth. So again, that evaluation criteria and that ranking exercise really gave us a roadmap to start putting together proposals. But we also had a few additional charges from the district that we knew we needed to accommodate, including finding homes for certain programs by 2017-18, including the Montessori at Moylan Magnet, Achievement First Summit, and New Visions programs. And we were trying to reduce excess capacity in the buildings, again, starting in 2017-18. I just want to reiterate that where the proposals are now is really focused on facilities and utilization and reducing excess capacity. The central office staff is well aware that there is a whole series of planning that has to occur with any one of these proposals to address a variety of issues, and that's really an implementation plan that will follow once the board has, or the committee has narrowed down to a direction that you're headed in. The factors that need to be addressed include programming, what new, expanded, or reduced programming might result to implement any one of these proposals, financial implications of any of these proposals, whether there's savings that can be reinvested into programming or other facilities. Community services is obviously very important. Some of these schools provide a variety of services to their neighborhoods, and central office staff is well aware of the need to work with city and community service providers to maintain or improve accessibility to those services. And then transition planning, not only for students and families, but also for staff. I know you've had the proposals, so I'm just going to review them quickly with you. Proposal 1 is, and all of the proposals are shown in 2 phases, the first phase being in 2017-18, the second in 2019-20. Proposal 1 has Clark not reopening, and that is the same, that is a constant through all 3 proposals. Achievement First Summit, relocating from Global to Fox Middle, also a constant in all 3 proposals. Martin Luther King closing in 2017-18, Simpson Waverly closing also. Relocating McDonough from its current building to the Moylan building, and then relocating Moylan Montessori to the McDonough building. Maintaining the ELAMS program in Moylan. Burns closing, and then the High Roads program from Simpson Waverly relocating to Moylan so that that entire facility is vacated. Phase 2 is, again, 2019-20. The Weaver project happens so that High School Inc. relocates and closes that lease space to Weaver. The JMA program relocates to Weaver. The Kinsella High School program relocates to Weaver. The JMA building is repurposed and becomes a 5th through 8th grade neighborhood school with a sister partner school in Wish, which becomes a pre-K 4 neighborhood school. And the High Roads program that's currently at the Locust Street Kinsella High School location relocates to Moylan, so that that lease may be ended. In these detail sheets, I want to emphasize that the numbers that are shown are not meant to represent actual proposed movement of students necessarily. What they are showing you are 2015-16 enrollments, as well as space available according to the 2015-16 enrollments. The actual movement of students, again, is going to come back to that implementation plan and how you set up the programming, whether you decide to guarantee seats in certain schools for some students, whether you do preference and lottery. How that is implemented is a decision that has to be made. What we were simply trying to show is an order of magnitude of the number of students that are going to be moved and where there is space available that might make sense to accommodate those students. And again, we used 2015-16 numbers. We felt that they were conservative numbers. As we already heard tonight, your enrollments have continued to decline, and we expect them to continue to decline. So the movement side will go down, and the available space will actually increase. So again, Achievement First Summit is relocated from Global to Fox Middle to consolidate with Achievement First programming. MLK is closed, space available at Global West Middle. Simpson Waverly is closed. There's space available in Rawson and Wish. McDonough relocates to Moylan, which the Moylan Montessori program has vacated that building, so there is room available. The Moylan Montessori program moves to the McDonough building. Burns closes, is dispersed to West Middle, Parkville, Sanchez, Moylan, and then the High Roads program is relocated to Moylan. That was phase 1 of proposal 1. In phase 2, again, the Weaver project, construction project happens, so High School Inc., JMA, and Kinsella programs all relocate to Weaver. Again, these numbers are not meant to represent the enrollment that would actually attend Weaver. These are just the current enrollments or 2015-16 enrollments of those programs. High Roads from Kinsella would relocate to Moylan, and then Wish, 5th through 8th grades, relocates to JMA as Wish becomes a pre-K 4 neighborhood school. So in proposal 1, 4 schools are closed, 3 current leases are ended, and there's a net decrease of just shy of 3,000 seats. Again, we tried to ensure that quality seats were made available to students that were in consolidated schools. And New Visions is a program that still needs a home, and that is pending identification of an appropriate site. proposal number 2. I'm just going to highlight what's different from proposal number 1 because there's a lot of commonality. Unfortunately, it's not showing up on your screen, but what is the same really is Clark not reopening Achievement First, consolidating at Fox Middle, MLK closing in phase 1. In proposal 2, we have Milner closing in phase 1. The High Roads program at Simpson, Waverly, and Kinsella consolidate together at Bulkley. The McDonough program relocates to Hartford Public High, and the Moylan Montessori program relocates to the McDonough building, and Burns closes. Those last two are similar in proposal 1. In phase 2, again, the Weaver construction project happens. High School Inc. relocates, JMA and Kinsella High School all relocate to Weaver. Again, the JMA building becomes a 5th through 8th grade neighborhood school with a partner in Wish at pre-K 4. And then in phase 2, Simpson Waverly closes. Again, showing where there is space available and the potential movement of students, something that would be worked out in an implementation plan. This is phase 2. Again, space available to receive students from consolidated schools or programs. So proposal 2 closes 5 schools and ends 3 current leases for a net decrease of about 3,500 seats in the system. Again, a home needs to be found for New Visions. Culinary phase out is already underway and is expected to be complete by 2018-19, and that's one of the leases that ends. Proposal 3 is different from proposal 1 and 2. It really is taking a more global look at your district and introducing more of a paradigm shift in looking at your grade configuration. So I'm going to spend a little more time on this one. There are still some commonalities between proposals 1 and 2 and 3 in that Clark is recommended not to reopen. Achievement First Summit is recommended to consolidate with other Achievement First programming. Proposal 3 includes closing Capital Community College Magnet Academy, closing MLK and Simpson Waverly in phase 1, closing the high school program at Global in order to open up additional space in Global to accommodate students from consolidated schools, Breakthrough 2 demagnetizing and transitioning to a neighborhood pre-K 5 school with similar programming potentially, relocating some of the special education programming that's located at Rawson currently to Breakthrough 2, again, opening more seats to accommodate students in consolidated facilities in that area, in those zones. Relocating McDonough to Hartford Public High, similar to proposal number 2. Moylan Montessori relocating to McDonough. Burns closes, and the High Roads program from Simpson Waverly relocates to Moylan. The real shift comes in phase 2 in 2019-20, when you convert to a pre-K 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, or 6, 12 model. The proposal is that Bulkley, Hartford Public High, JMA, and MD Fox would all receive 6th through 8th grades. And that your remaining neighborhood schools that may be currently pre-K 5, pre-K 8, reconfigured to pre-K 5. So that includes Asian Studies, Batchelder, Burr, Kennelly, Naylor, Sand, West Middle, and Wish. The Weaver construction project occurs, so High School Inc., Kinsella, and JMA locate there, and that opens the opportunity for the JMA building to become a neighborhood 6th through 8th that feeds Weaver High School. Again, High School Inc. relocates and ends that lease. Kinsella's lease ends, and the proposal is to close Milner in phase 2, and the High Roads program from Kinsella to relocate to Moylan. Once again, we're just showing the 15-16 enrollments where there is space available that may accommodate consolidations. And again, we're showing the conversion of your pre-K 8 neighborhood schools to pre-K 5, so the 6th through 8th grades. then locate to Hartford Public, Bulkley, MD Fox, and JMA. Proposal number 3 closes 5 schools and ends 4 current leases. The additional lease there would be Capital Community College Magnet for a net decrease of 3,573 seats. This proposal really represents a significant change to your system with the grade reconfiguration that it introduces. So it is markedly different from proposals 1 and 2. Again, space will be found for New Visions, and culinary is in the process of phasing out. Oops. So at this point, we'll take questions. Sorry.
If people have questions now, we'll ask them. If you think of, I mean, this is probably the first of many series of questions. If you come up with questions when you get home tonight, funnel them through Jose, okay? And they'll funnel out and come back. But so we'll take whatever questions people have tonight, but this is probably the first of 12 opportunities. People will have to ask questions or something, you know, that they'll be, it's not like these are going to be the only questions that are fielded. Right.
If you want to
So,
think about it.
exactly. So, and you have another meeting of Equity 2020, right?
Yes, in
When is that?
November. What's the date of the next Equity 2020 where we'll refine the proposals? November
16.
13th.
So we have our board workshop in 2 weeks for November, which we will devote entirely to this subject. Probably have to shape that agenda somewhat, but you'll start with whatever questions people have here today that can't be immediately answered, and whatever new information you guys develop in the next couple of weeks. And also, I'd like to see some sort of summary of the comments that were given in the 3 small groups the other night. I mean, I've looked at the notes, but obviously I think everybody on the board needs to see
And we'll have
what that analysis is.
we'll also have the summary of the input from the schools and the school governance councils and PTOs.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So we already collected all the comments from last week's
Right.
meeting. So those we're going to be sharing with the Equity 2020
Right.
committee, and then we'll share the information.
I'd like to see those
Tomorrow,
before, yeah.
yes, tomorrow night as well, we'll
Okay.
have information from the entire community of the SGC.
Right, but I'd like to see that before the next workshop.
Oh, you will?
Yes. Okay,
Absolutely.
just right.
Your
Okay.
analysis is 48 hours to actually compile.
All right, that's good. All right, so, and this is more for, I guess, before I open up for questions, this is more for the other members of the board. Right now, the School Choice and Facilities Committee doesn't have a chair because Beth Taylor resigned from the board. Would it be helpful, no, you have finance. Would it be, which you asked for, would it be helpful? Right, no, would it be helpful for that committee also to move on a parallel process to look at some of this? Or would that just be duplicative work? And I don't expect an answer from folks tonight, but just let me know what you think. And if so, I mean, I might appoint myself as temporary chair, at least until we get some new members, and just do that. I don't know, I'm throwing that out there, and I'd like, you wanted finance.
Yeah, but I can switch. I'm a patriot.
A good soldier down there.
But anyway, I mean, that's something to think about. But now, if people have questions, we'll start putting them out there, and we'll just start banging these out and try to understand as much as we can. And then I suspect we're going to probably have to get together at some point, either all of us or subsets of us, and start talking about what we may or may not be able to do. But we'll open it up and start for questions. Who wants to go first? Mr. Stallings.
Hate to be a Debbie Downer,
No, you don't.
but my first question is actually, I don't really, there's really nothing to question, simply because this is just unacceptable in its form. And so when are we gonna get to the actual ripping this apart and figuring that, I mean, I'm assuming it's at the next Equity 2020 meeting? So I'll ask this. I remember asking, or I remember the question being asked in one of the meetings about the student performance data in magnet schools and correct schools versus the neighborhood schools. And I'm sure you put it in here somewhere. I can't find it. And I'm just wondering what that data was and how, what are the, I guess, performance levels of our neighborhood school, our neighborhood kids, primarily from zones 1 and 2, how they're performing in their home zones versus in these magnet schools or correct schools.
Go ahead. So that's a level of detail that we cannot get down to because that would require tracing individual students. We were looking at enrollment in schools in those zones. And can you show the evaluation criteria? We looked at Hartford Public Schools, who could provide the performance data we needed. And we looked at Smarter Balance testing scores, and we looked at SAT results for high school students. And we looked at every school in your system, and again, ranked them on this 3-tier scale, where we took those scores, and for the Smarter Balance, we had 2 years worth of results to work with, so we took an average of the 2 years. For the SAT results, we only had 1 year of data to work with, so we just took the scores for both math and verbal, and we evaluated, we compared your schools to come and came up with this 30th percentile ranking of all schools against each other.
Let me ask, Mr. Stallings, is your question, what is the performance of Zone 1 and 2 students who go to magnet schools, both ours and CRAC?
Yes.
Okay. They wouldn't have that information. Is it possible to aggregate that by using student ID numbers traced to residence?
Yeah, probably, I'd have to talk to the data team to see what that would take. It would require going student by student.
I don't know.
I think we can, but
I don't see why we couldn't. Because his address is attached to student ID numbers, so if you can sort them by address, you should be able to do that, right?
We can, but not CREC.
Not CRAC.
Yeah.
So only our own. We could ask CRAC.
But that's my point. We were supposed to get that information, and last I knew, we were supposed to get the data, and so I'm assuming you never got the data.
We got enrollment data from CREC so that we were able to tell you where your students are going by zone. And I believe that's what we were asked for.
Right.
And we asked.
And that's what we got.
Both those requests were made, so we got one of the two.
No, we didn't get a performance request from CREC.
The reason why that's relevant to what we're doing and what schools you're recommending. So if you're saying, listen, the school is ranked this way academically, then that's relevant information that we need to have to deliberate over what school we're going to choose to close or not close, what programs we're going to sustain and what programs we're not going to sustain. So for me, that's a major caveat. And I remember, and if just for the record, I distinctly remember the question, and so if it was misunderstood, I can appreciate that, because again, it's a matter of articulating and trying to figure out what you really want to know. But that goes to the narrative of what we have to deal with in terms of implementation, things like that. So I won't bore you with that. So I guess the last question.
Well, hold on, before you get to the last one, why don't we do this? We can aggregate our own data, right? We can ask CRAC if they're willing to provide theirs. I don't know that they will. I don't know that they won't. They're more forthcoming than they have been, but that has previously been secretly guarded data that is very, very hard to get your hands on. But we can ask, and we will ask. Sure. And if they say no, I can talk to Greg Florio and see if I can persuade him.
Or we can just change relationships.
Right. Well,
and get our kids back. So the second thing,
why make peace when we can make war instead?
Hey, it's already a war. So the next question, I have so many questions. I'm trying to get the major ones out. This plan. So the pathways or the transitions, how did you come up with that, the theory or the suggestion, these kids can go from here to here? Was it just simply location, or so it was okay, answer the question. I have no further questions at this time because I'm trying to make them simple.
Right. I have a question, which I'll ask
Yes.
before I take other questions. Your assumption is that 50% of all the seats in our magnet schools and correct magnet schools will go to our students. That is not the current rate.
Correct.
And in fact, to do that in our schools would require, actually in the correct schools as well, it's not the case, and it would require certain changes in how we do the lottery and weight it probably for that to be the case, right? How many what is the delta between our students now in magnet schools here and in CREC and what 50-50 would look like? How many students are we talking about? Is it 1,000, 2,000?
I don't remember the correct number offhand, but we were looking at about, I think, 1,400 students within your system.
And theirs would probably be somewhat comparable.
Yeah, I believe.
Okay, so if we couldn't go to 50-50, we'd have to find spots for, say, 2,600 students, right now?
No.
Now, why?
Even under any of these proposals.
Right.
We were looking at a maximum of 3,500 seats reduced when you have an excess of 8,000.
I understand that, but if I don't go to 50-50, I can't seat all those kids. I mean, I have hundreds of seats, say, in classical magnet, right? I cannot seat those kids in those, I can't seat kids in that school without a change to 50-50, right? Because I can't break the lottery. So if I can't go to 50-50, right, if I have to keep it the way it is, how does that affect your analysis?
Greatly.
Right.
It keeps more students in your neighborhood schools.
Correct.
Or in different choice schools.
Right, right. By a
so-
pretty significant factor.
However, I'd like to point out that, again, the numbers we were showing you were 2015-16 numbers. They're how you operate currently.
Right. Oh, I understand that. I understand that. But if the assumption is 50-50, that means more kids will move into magnets, right?
Right.
Right. So it will exacerbate the vacancies in non-magnet schools.
Correct.
By a factor probably of, if it's 1,300 of my own, then it's probably 2,500 in total that will move out of neighborhood schools into magnets at 50-50. Okay. Absent 50-50, those kids remain where they are. Okay.
Correct.
So, I mean, this plan, what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to clarify for everybody. This plan hinges in large part on 50-50, because if there's no 50,
No, because
no.
again, we're showing you 2015-16
Yeah,
numbers,
right.
which is how you operate now. So
Right.
those kids are in your schools
Right.
now, and we haven't taken away more seats than are available. We haven't taken away more seats than those number of kids would fill.
Well, okay, so if you go 50-50, what happens? In your analysis, do you maximize the seats then? Let's take classical magnet, which has hundreds of vacant seats right now, okay? Does your analysis maximize those seats and then determine what's left?
To distribute among your neighborhood
Correct.
schools? Yes,
Okay.
essentially that.
Right, but if I can't fill those seats then, because I can't maximize them because I'm legally impeded from doing so, those seats are not available, which means those kids can't fill those seats.
Correct.
Okay, so if I can't go to 50-50, then I don't have the seats at Classical Magnet and, say, Capital Prep, which are the two probably the most vacant.
Correct, which is precisely why we use 2015-16 numbers to show you that even if that assumption cannot come true,
Right.
you will still have space available.
Oh, right. But, I mean, I will have space, there's no doubt about that, I have 7,000 empty seats, right?
And not in schools
Right.
where you can't place them.
It doesn't change the seat delta and deficit at all, it's just where they're actually being accounted for.
Well,
That assumption of 50-50.
right.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the number of students, it changes where they can go.
However, everywhere where we were showing you where they can go
Right,
are places they can go. We
right.
weren't using magnets.
Yeah.
Okay,
as
so no,
receivers.
that's, I understand that, but you didn't deduct, I mean, if we go to 50-50, then kids are gonna move out of where they are now, right? Because we're not at 50-50. What percentage of our magnet schools students are our kids? I don't know, was it?
It varies by school.
Right, but what's the average?
It's actually like 48%.
Okay, so not that much higher.
No.
Okay. All right, what's Crex, do we know? It's not that, it's not
Yeah, it's lower.
50-50.
It's lower, I don't know.
Right.
If I can inject, that's kind of what I was getting,
Right.
I was hinting at. I mean, it's really a matter of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Are we going to change the way that we're doing business, and are we going to change that 50 50 requirement for more of a 70-30 or something to that effect, and how are we going to protect enrollment around, let's say, new buildings like Weaver and some other things. How are we going to protect the enrollment and to be able to maintain it? So in one sense, and again, I'm speaking for myself right now, I am not bound by any restrictions of chef or anything like that. I can fill kids in magnet schools, so we can do that. It's allowed, just from right here. But the point being, if we can do that, then it's, one, we can close more buildings and we can take more facilities offline. So again, the question is, right now, how are we going to proceed? Are we going to proceed with, and I'll beat my colleagues' mantra from it, I'll steal it. Are we going to do attendance boundaries around schools to protect enrollment, or are we going to feed into and maintain a lottery? And so for me, that really determines how we're going to proceed with a school consolidation and school closure. If we continue with the lottery, then we need to sort of handcuff the choice office and sort of redevelop protocols and procedures. If we're going to go to attendance boundaries, then we need to dismantle, in my opinion, the whole chef choice office and sort of figure out strategically where we're going to locate our schools and what zones, how we're going to facilitate choice in those zones, and then identify, I guess, more facilities that we can take offline. So that's, to me, kind of, before we even get into the nooks and crannies of it, for me, that's the major question. And unfortunately, you can't answer that.
No, I want to go back. If you were to if I were to tell you, don't assume 50-50, assume the current level of percentages both in Hartford and in Craig, how, if at all, would this look different? I mean, one of your underlying assumptions is 50-50 allocation of magnet schools, right? And that's not the allocation that exists today. You're telling me it's about 47% in our schools, and I know it's lower at Craig because one of the things they're obligated to do is try to move to 50-50, and they're not as close as we are. So.
Well, they keep getting waivers.
Right, I know, but, which means they're taking less of our kids than they have to. So if we assume 50-50, there's going to be a slice of our kids that are going to go to Craig that aren't going to Craig now, which will reduce the number of kids in our system. Okay, so if I don't assume 50-50, if I assume the current status quo, how many kids does that put back into there? Because I'm not losing some number of kids to Craig, right? Which may be as many as 1,000 kids, which is 2 schools maybe. Now, that doesn't change facilities issues, right? I mean, it doesn't change the fact that, schools are in the shape that they're in or the academic performance, but it does change my enrollment numbers, right?
And the SBB.
Right. Well, not so much the SPB, but it just changes my enrollment numbers. Okay. But how many kids is that?
We'd have to.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have to look at
We'd
the
have to
numbers.
get back to give you.
Please, because that's, obviously, it's an assumption. It may be a good assumption. It may be an assumption we can make happen, but it is not the current status quo. And, before I start closing schools on the assumption that more kids are going to Craig, it would be nice. It would be nice to know what happens if they don't go to Craig,
Right.
and what I'm left with in terms of, capacity to deal with, say, 1,000 kids that I assume are going to Craig that don't end up going to Craig. And I was like, yeah.
Are we asking the consultants to send information back to the board?
No, I can send it to you.
Email, or
Yeah, or
then share with Equity 2020?
Both. I think it's an important point.
Just
How
to
many?
make sure that
Right.
it's funneled
and
to them.
just to clarify what our task and
Right.
charge is as part of this, is this also to assume if Hartford is going status quo, that Craig would be going status quo?
That's exactly my question. Yes, that is exactly my question. What happens if we don't go to 50-50? What does that do in terms of putting kids back on the board or taking them off the board? Because I think 50-50 has its merits and virtues, but it is not what the chef stipulations are today, and there's no guarantee that we're ever going to get there. It might be a good idea, it might not be. I have, to be honest with you, I have my doubts about 50-50, but okay. But it's not the current. That is a change in the status quo. The status quo is not 50-50. We're at like 47%, and Craig is probably at some number lower than that, right? So if we assume 50-50, you're automatically taking kids off that board and sending them to Craig. That may happen, but it may not. And I have to know how many kids that is, so I can decide whether that's a safe assumption to make for planning purposes. It's an easy, I mean, it's just finding out what the percentage of Crack kids, Hartford kids in Crack are, and then backfilling that to figure out what it would be if it was 50-50. I mean, it is purely a math exercise. And I want to know what that number is. And it may not end up doing anything with that number, but I want to know what the number is. I mean, because if you're telling me at the end of this, let's say we took out, 2,600 seats, right? Or 2,500 seats. How many empty seats would I still have in Hartford? Would I have 7,200 empty seats now, something like that?
8,000. Yeah, I think important to point out is that our district-wide projections, which we have the most confidence in because it's a larger sample
Right,
size,
sure.
and we've worked with the district before, do to some degree reflect current status because we do look at
Of course.
enrollment trends of the past 3
Right,
years.
well, of course.
What was in our analysis was really the distribution of students of that district-wide projection if you went to a 50-50 model.
Correct. And if I don't go to 50-50, that
Right.
number's different.
But what I just want to point out
Right.
is, we use that to look at projected utilizations, but again, knowing that that was such a
Right.
large assumption to make, we went back to the 2015-16 numbers when we were looking at proposals.
Okay.
So I don't think.
I understand what you're saying.
And to further clarify too, that going towards 50-50 was a movement in that direction. It wasn't saying in
Right.
year
Right.
1, year 2 of our projections that all of a sudden we've shifted,
Okay.
we've changed
All
the
right.
balance of how it's done and we're automatically at 50-50.
Okay.
It was a very gradual over the life of the projection.
Which is what, 10 years projection?
Yes,
Okay. And at the end of 10 years, are you at 50-50?
yes.
In your, okay.
And CREC is, Hartford going to CREC is as well.
Right, okay. All right. I'm just trying to understand that assumption
yeah, and
because it's about a 1,200 kid assumption,
Yes.
basically.
And we've showed 15-16 numbers as well as 19-20 numbers. So even in the 19-20, we are not at 50-50.
Right.
Okay, but you're moving in that direction. In 1920, where are you? Do you, if you know?
We'd have to look
I'd
at
have to
the,
look it up to get you there.
Okay, that's fine. That would be I mean, obviously, that would be useful to know. I mean, it's probably one of the most important assumptions you're making. And I'm not saying it's the wrong assumption. It may end up being that, but if it's not, I got to know what that looks like too, because obviously, putting 1,200 kids. Well, let's see. If we cut 2,500 seats, we have 7,200 seats. That would leave about 4,700 empty seats in the city. So I could accommodate another 1,200 students. But the question is, what schools would they go to? Where do they live? Right, and what that does to projected utilizations in different schools. But it'd be good to know that. So that's probably my single biggest question at this point: is what this looks like without 50-50. In terms of just the raw number of students that I have to account for, that, your assumption is they're gonna go to CREC, which may happen, but if it doesn't, I have to have a place for them. All right, who else has questions?
Can I just say this then? The community's assumption is spot on then with this. This is a phase-out plan of a whole community of schools. That's what it is, to reach or to fulfill CHEF, which is that 50-50 status. And that's, from a neighborhood standpoint, that's what the community and parents are pushing against. Because that doesn't sustain Hartford. That is not a Hartford, it's not advantageous for us. It's not something that benefits us, this plan. Because what we need to do is sustain neighborhoods, and we need to figure out how to reduce transportation and get kids walking to and from school and making sure they have quality education within their neighborhood. So my next question, and I'm sorry if you guys jump in, I'll be quiet after this, is in your scenario, is there a scenario that you did not publish that will preserve at least a few of those schools in that zone and sort of figure out how to reconfigure this so that, I know you're working for the 50-50, but again, and I can't say this enough, I am not working towards this 50-50. So that is just not my agenda at all. So in the flip side of things, how can we figure out how to sustain neighborhood schools and still do some of this? Or how, is that possible? I guess is the question. Taking away the conditions of buildings, theoretically, is that possible? Because there's certain buildings that just have to, Martin Luther King is just a building that we just can't figure out anymore. Clark has PCBs, we need to discuss what we're gonna do with that. But, for example, there's some obvious things, there are obvious structural issues that we just can't ignore. But is it possible to do that mathematically?
So I don't understand.
Meaning, can we take at least 2 of these schools off? If not, why not? If we can take, how can we preserve in the northeast corridor some of these schools that are neighborhood institutions is pretty much what I'm asking.
I mean, I suppose you could, let me ask this question. You could rerun your analysis controlling for certain schools going to be open, right? Where no matter what happens, this school stays open, right? You could control for your analysis, right? If, like, for instance, if I were to say, if the money were to magically appear somehow to renovate the Martin Luther King School, right, such that it would no longer be the worst facility ranking, right? It would go down from a facility 5 to facility 1, theoretically, right? Okay, so that would bring the summary score down to 7, which would actually put it in the middle of the pack, right? What would that look like? I think that's your question?
Yes.
Okay, that's your question. Is that, it is theoretically possible, right? You'd have to take the school out and you'd have to.
It's an assumption.
Right. And so, okay, so what is it you're asking them to control for?
Let's say the Weaver pipeline. Let's protect the Weaver pipeline. So we need 900 enrollment in Weaver. So how do we protect the feeder schools that go into Weaver?
I think that's beyond an enrollment question. Are you asking them to control the kid,
but it's
the money's going to be there for Martin Luther King? Is that
no. But again, we need to guarantee. So, for example, we need to guarantee 900 student enrollment.
Yeah.
So, is it possible? Say, for example, like I alluded to before, if we just in my case scenario, if we eliminated choice office, put an attendance boundary around the school, and could we find, is it theoretically possible, because you said that there's the amount of people living in these districts are decreasing. So in just the general areas that some of these schools are located, is it possible to figure out boundaries to say, all right, fine, we can guarantee through a lottery and neighborhood system, 900 kids will be in this building from this time to 15 years from now. We can sustain a steady enrollment.
I don't think they can guarantee. I don't think they can do that.
Well,
they can model it, but we would actually have to do all the work to make it happen.
And who's supposed to be doing the work? Because they should be sitting next to you.
No, they could model what it would look like.
Right. That's what I mean.
But whether or not that could actually happen is A, debatable, and B, it would require those people sitting over there actually to come up with it. But that's a big assumption. That's a big series of assumptions. Like, we're going to get rid of the choice office and just draw attendance boundaries everywhere.
I don't know if is that a question that we want them to answer right now?
I just want to know if it's possible to possibly have a model it.
Well, can I add on to that?
Sure.
Okay, so, is it possible, really, I think, to evolve what you're saying is to actually operate from the assumption of the schools that we want to keep open? Because I also just want to say, I understand that there is a significance to speaking in terms of seats, because one of the things that's not evidenced in here, which I know we all know, is that there's actually seats open, forgetting 50-50 as an assumption and as an evolution, there's actual seats open right now, whole sections of magnet schools that are open, that are not included in this analysis of where kids could go for the most part, except for there was that one instance where you demagnetized Breakthrough 2, I guess, but I think. But on the flip side, it's hurting my ears to hear us keep talking in terms of seats. I want us to talk about schools, and we just keep talking about seats. And I think that is kind of to your point. Is there a way to actually do this analysis under the assumption of what schools we want to have, and what programming we want to give them, and how we actually want to make them thrive? which is like a programmatic thing, which is our thing, but like that's like the vision for like what the landscape looks like, that we are actually saying like this is what we want to keep, as opposed to like, I mean, and again, I mean that obviously has to be informed by these other factors, but is there another way to run this analysis based on what we want to keep?
When you say keep, I mean, is the building not fitting a certain program? If there is a desire to have a certain program in place? I mean, when you take a really hard look at the number of students, if you were even able to retain in a given zone all of your students, not going out to CREC, not participating in the open choice, maintain them all, you would still have a need to consolidate some buildings in each of these zones that we've identified.
Yeah, I'm not saying
So,
that
I
that's
mean,
not
but
the case. I'm just saying, like, can you?
But getting away from seating and looking at buildings and saying, 50-50, no 50-50, just the number of children we have in each given area, whether you decided to go ahead and redraw attendance boundaries, protect, be able to ward off, the loss of students. Whatever you were to come up with, the reality of it is that you still have too many seats, especially in these areas, zone 1 and 2, relative to the number of students that are there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm
just-
not saying that there's not the assumptions that these other factors are going to play, but I'm speaking from the standpoint of like looking at like kind of the landscape,
Yeah.
thinking backward from the
I know
landscape that we
exactly-
want to have
Yeah, I know exactly
in
where
terms
you're
of
coming
like
from.
what,
I mean-
community schools like that we actually want to have. We talk about all these things that are going to be lost, and we heard from like people like all evening talking about like services and programs and things. I mean, so is there a way to do this analysis like backwards, I guess is what I'm
The
asking.
parallel process is determining what type of programming you want to have, what kind of resources you want to have, and then marrying that to the facilities that are there. I mean, in an ideal world, if you were to invest, does this facility with some investment allow you to do that program better than this facility? And use the program fit for the building and the neighborhood as a decision-making tool rather than the building condition capacity.
That is possible. I mean, I know that's not what you did, but that is an analysis that could be done
Well,
in a
it's,
different
yeah,
order.
and it's typical where you would have the parallel process of the administration and, another committee working towards the educational goals when you identify what you want to do, and then looking at this process and saying, where does it fit, where does it parallel, well, does it converge, diverge, and figuring out where it aligns and saying, yeah, that's a good target because it aligns, or it doesn't here, and maybe we want to go in a little different direction. So that's two different ways of looking at it, from the brick and mortar and sort of kids and container standpoint, which we did, versus sort of the educational vision of where you want to go. In everything that we've produced and have done, we assume that the way the system operates would be following that status quo, and that's reflected in how and how we've modeled
From a
this.
programmatic point of view.
Yes,
Status quo from a programmatic point of view.
yes,
Okay.
because it's not up to us to be able to shift direction of education.
Right. You can only model my assumptions, or the assumptions that you're given.
Or try our best to.
Right. Well, it goes to the quality of the model, right, and the reliability of the model. But I could ask you to come up with a model, right? I mean, just for example, if we said, oh, we want to go to a, K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12 form of education in Hartford, here are my buildings, right? You show me,
This is what it looks like.
right, which is in part what scenario 3, that's in part what it is, and that's in part what it would look like, okay. So, now you have an Equity 2020 meeting when?
When is it, Jose? November 13th?
Scheduled for November
Okay.
13th. Might be earlier than that.
All right, which is after our workshop. Because what I'd like to do is before we do that, before you have that meeting on the 13th, I'd like to have at least people on this board express some opinion about this that, can inform Equity 2020. I mean, if the reality is no one on this board, we'll just say hypothetically, no one on this board supports proposal 2. Well, I mean, then what, right, or, if no one on this board is willing to do something, then I think the Equity 2020 people need to know that.
That's right. No, your guidance would be extremely
Right,
helpful.
and I'm not asking for votes, but if people, if 6 people speak out at a meeting and say, I will not, this is a bad idea, well, I mean, they should know that, because, you know, it'd be pointless to come back to this board and here's your proposal with something that no one on this board, you know, or people on this board already know they wouldn't support, or things that this better be in here because we all believe that this is what we need to do. And I don't think we have to do that tonight, but we have to do that in advance of their next Equity 2020 meeting, which means people are going to need to come to the next workshop prepared, going to have to be prepared to talk about what's here and, you know, what's a no-go, what's a must-have, what's, I don't know, debatable, what I have questions about, understanding that that informs what they do, but ultimately we're not voting on anything, we have to come back and we're gonna have to vote on it. But I don't want to put them in the position where they come up with a proposal and it's something that nobody at this table can actually support. I mean, that's a waste of all of our time, including yours, but I mean, ours and the Equity 2020 committee and the people that work for us at the board. So you had questions.
Yes, and I have a concern. It's not really goes beyond what we asked Malone McBroom to do for us, but I think it should be a concern for us as a board and for Hartford Public Schools, and it's the services that we provide, because the schools that we're targeting are community schools. And we had the representative from Compass speak quite eloquently about services that are provided at the schools, and we close the schools. The services, the needs that are in those communities are not going to go away. And they really go well beyond academics and programming, but there are things that have to be addressed in the lives of these children, these families, if the children are going to be successful in school. So we have to think of how we're going to continue to provide those services and work with our community partners, so those things would not be lost. And I think that's a big concern, a big part of what the community's concerns are, that where are the services going? And I haven't heard any of that in our discussions. And I've raised it before relative to Burns specifically, but I think it applies to all the community schools.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just jump in really quickly, if I may. We've been talking with the Hartford Partnership for Student Success, and that's the Hartford Public Schools, the City of Hartford, the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, and the United Way, that really funds, envisions, runs the community school model, and they're very aware of this process, and know that there will be an opportunity, right, to move services if we need to, right? And we're in the process now of looking at, which schools will be the next round of community schools. So I just wanted to put that out there as a point of information, that that's a parallel process. They're really waiting for your recommendation and vote around this.
It's
I think it's
important for the
backward.
community to know
Yes.
that that's not lost in the process. That's a big part of the
I
process.
think it's
I
also
agree.
backward. I
That's
think
what
it's
I'm
all, I
saying.
think that is backward. I think that you cannot ask people to accept on faith
Right.
that we're gonna close schools and then we're
And
gonna
then
do
work
all
it
this
out
other
later.
stuff.
Right.
That is backward. It's backward.
So I can just say, from the North End perspective, this is all unacceptable, and we can't support any of it, because we value our neighborhood schools. They're anchors of our community. We have social economic issues, and what we try to do is have our community focus on schools and schools focus on the community. This eradicates that whole concept of community. And what we need, and I won't go on my chef height soapbox tonight because I'm tired, but but I will say that we're not interested in fulfilling chef. So we're not interested in we're not interested in it. So what we're interested in, I'm not doing it. I promise you I'm not doing it. Because I'm waiting for the right moment. But what I'm saying is,
we're not.
right. We need to have a balanced option. We need to have balanced options. We need to have not necessarily a wide variety of choices, but we need to maintain that. And then we also, as a district, need to understand and maintain certain levels of swing space, or certain capacities of swing space, in order to allow some of our schools to grow, and then sort of, tweak schools that are not growing. So for me, this is a plan that we should be able to, as a district, whether we're here or not, be able to revisit every, 15 years or something to that effect. So I just need to say that on record. I appreciate the work that you've done, and there are elements of what you've proposed here that could possibly work. But there are other things beyond your control that would have to be discussed and sort of throw into the mix in order to do that. And I would just lastly close with the whole community school concept in and of itself is another process that subverts the board from actually being able to direct control and have autonomy over our community schools. And that is also another issue that affects programming and affects quality.
Okay, I have another question. We're at 70, your analysis, we're at 73%, right? A healthy number would be what, 85%, 88%, something like that? Well, right, but I mean, a healthy number that you can, I mean, that's a livable number, right? I understand that, but is it 99%? Is it 94%? Is it 92%? Is it 88%?
Yeah, I know. Considering sort of the uncertain nature of how schools
Right.
are going to be filled out, I'd say, mid-80s would be a reasonable percentage.
All right, so we'll
to
say
shoot for.
85%. The difference between 73 and 85 is how many seats? It's 12%, so what's that, about 2,500 seats maybe? I'm thinking about a different way to slice this up, which is if you're telling me really I should have 2,500 less seats, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, relative to a sliding enrollment, so.
Right.
Yeah, you'd have to figure out at what point in time you want to hit your target and then what that number would
Right,
be.
but that 2,500 less seats would put me much more towards 85% capacity. Right, and it doesn't really matter how you get there, I suppose, as long as you get there. But I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is what is the optimal, or what is, I mean, that's not what the optimal is, but what is a survivable utilization rate? I mean, obviously, if you're at 68% like Boston or Philadelphia, that's probably not survivable, right? But if you're at 102% or 104%, that has its own set of problems,
Yeah,
right?
And I think
So a healthy range would be,
no one sort of utilization
Okay.
fits all. I think you look at each community's individual economic circumstance
Right.
as well, and you plan your number around that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when you begin looking at, say, for the entire district, you definitely want to be in the middle of the 80 percentile.
so 85% or north, realistically.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to happen in 1 year.
I
but
understand
the end
that,
of
right.
At the end of that planning process over a number of years,
Right.
you should strive to get to that.
Right. Like 10 years from now, I should have 2,700 or 2,800 less seats, more than that, 3,500 less seats, something like 3,000.
4,500.
How many?
4,500.
4,500 in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
That would be a good thing. Because what I'm trying to do is understand what I mean, from a utilization point of view, right? What I should do, which is I should have less seats, okay, I understand that. But how many, right? 1,000 less, 2,000 less, 5,000 less, 8,000 less, and you're telling me if I had 4,500 less seats, I would feel good about life, or I'd feel better about life. I have a smaller platform that is more realistic given to the number of students I have to serve, right? And would be more manageable from a facilities point of view, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and depending on how you got there, so what those decisions were from a facilities point of view.
Correct.
You would have things like cost avoidance along
Sure.
the way, obviously.
Right,
and-
I could make the mayor very happy because I don't have 16 new requests to renovate
Sure.
buildings, right? 'Cause I can-
Operational efficiency,
Right.
maybe put money back into the opportunities.
Right, okay. But I'm just trying to understand what a healthy number would be, and you're telling me north of 85% north would be a good number.
Yeah.
Okay, which is, when we're at 73, so basically I need to chop off,
And you want to put something out there that's realistically attainable, so I think that would be
Right.
a good number based on where you're at with some of the other buildings that you can control and you can't control, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Over 10 years.
you want to get to 85%, which means you want to cut about 4,500 seats in 10 years, okay? That's that's another way of slicing the onion. And I say, what 4,500 seats am I going to cut, right?
Right.
But
But at least you have a number.
But if that's, because people are gonna say, well, what do I need to do, right? Well, you need to cut seats. How many? What you're telling me is, there's no fixed number, but a good number would be 4,500, because that would get me to about 85% utilization, which is a reasonable and healthy number, right? That's what Baltimore that's what Washington wants to be at 84, right? Baltimore wants to be at 86. So if we're at 85, right, we're with the herd. Okay. So that's, I should be looking to chop 4,500 seats in 10 years, basically. Okay. I mean, that's something that you can plan around, right? You can have an argument about, and now you have a concrete number that you can work around, right?
You figure best how you need to do it.
Exactly, right? I mean, does that come with just retiring facilities as they age out, right? Is it affirmatively closing things, right? You know, I don't know, but I mean, that's the number that I'm trying to work towards, or I should be trying to work towards from a space utilization point of view. Now, where I have those seats is, where I have those seats that are empty is a whole different kettle of fish, right? That implicates other things far beyond what you guys do, right? It's a transportation issue, that's a political issue, right? I mean, that's the stuff that
You have to deal with.
why we get the big bucks over here, right?
Did you plan sports facilities in this? No?
No.
Okay.
I have some questions, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
So the first thing is I just have some kind of procedural questions. First off, I'd be interested, and this is more of a question for the superintendent, in seeing the contract with Malone and McBroom, or whatever it's called, and seeing what the details of that contract are, the price, what sort of services we were offered or promised. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'd like to see what assumptions you made. I think people have been talking about it today, but when you're going through this process, it doesn't really tell us here how you're like what sort of assumptions you're making. I think everyone's talking about, like, what are you assuming? So for instance, are you taking into account that there's fancy new condominiums going up in the middle of the city, for instance? So,
Yes.
you propose closing Burns, and there's a 400 unit apartment going up on Capitol Avenue, for instance, right? So is that, you don't have to necessarily answer that question right now, but I guess I'm curious as to, like, what are the assumptions that you threw into you doing your things? Because something like the Burns thing doesn't make sense when you, for me anyway, from a layperson, just saying you're putting this thing up and then you're closing a school right literally like 2 blocks over. So, if that could be shared, that'd be helpful. Also, it'd be helpful to see the Excel, this information in Excel. There's some charts here that you put in. If I could just get these in Excel, that would be helpful. These things right here, the summary scores. Also, it'd be helpful to see what the individual utilization rate is for each school. There's a lot of information being thrown out about what percentage of this school or that school is being used, and it'd be helpful to see what that looks like. So those are just some from in terms of like our work with the contractor, with the demographer. I guess I have another question about just procedure. So I'm understanding from the committee members, the Equity 2020 committee members, that they had a series of conversations, and then they talked about some things, kind of generally speaking, looked at some enrollment, and then the proposals were kind of thrusted upon them. Like, here you go, here's the proposals. And it wasn't necessarily all that kind of informed by the committee. So can anyone speak to that?
It will be. As I said before, we always laid it out this way, that the agenda would be, we'd look at enrollment analysis, we'd look at capacity. The consultants did add an additional step at the request of the committee to look at the zonal analysis of where students live and where they go to school. So that it did add an addition away from our original kind of syllabus of the course of work that we were trying to pursue. And then we said we would ask them to put together the enrollment and the capacity utilization pieces to put out possible scenarios or proposals, and that we would gather community input and then come back to them again. We did get their input this past week. We'll come back again and again refine proposals based on their input, but it's always what we said we were going to do and what we laid out originally as the course of work. And again, I just want to reiterate here today what the board chair said and what we spoke about at our retreat. I'm not sure if you were there, Robert, on September 27th, but we're really looking for guidance from you. If there is no proposal that's going to be acceptable, let us know now. If there are elements of a proposal that are acceptable, please let us know. If you need to pause the process for any reason, superintendent leaving, other reasons, please let us know. And if there are things that will work that you don't see, please let us know. Otherwise, as our chairman said, it's a waste of everybody's time. So we did what we said we were going to do. We provided the deliverables. These are, as the consultant said, conversation starters, as designed. So they're options for you to consider. If, again, nothing is going to be acceptable, that's okay. But you're going to have to make some tough choices as we plan for budgeting and allocating resources for schools in the coming year. So, that was the plan. Again, we've adjusted, based on feedback from the committee each time. So that's how we've been operating. But again, we really are looking for your guidance now in terms of how we move forward and what's next in terms of our interaction with the committee and the community.
I would just add, thank you, just in response to that. I think what troubles me is that although you can put this out as just a plan or a proposal, in reality, in practice, this is destabilizing for schools. And so it's actually quite violent to say, MLK, you might close. It's destabilizing for those schools. And if you don't understand that, then you probably aren't in the right place, right? To be putting this stuff out there. If you don't understand that, the kids at Burns, the parents at Burns are freaking out right now because they're worried about their school, right? And same with MLK and same with Milner. And you've actually damaged the schools by doing that. Just simply throwing it out there and seeing what sticks. That's irresponsible in my opinion. Like whether this is a good plan or not, just throw this shit out there, excuse my language. That's wrong what you've done to these schools, okay? So let's take that, think about that for a minute, okay? So my next question is, what if we do nothing? I mean, we're funding the schools now as they are, right? And what if we just do nothing, right? I mean, we have fewer students, so in theory, we have fewer students, same amount of money. We might be able to serve them even better, possibly. So that is my next question, is why, what if we do nothing?
I'll take a stab at those two, and then please, if you have something to add. It's not fair to blame them for the proposals that are out there.
I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming whoever decided that was a good idea to just throw this out there.
And again, it's why I asked the board on the 27th, do we go forward before we put proposals out there? And I know they were vetted with board members before they even went out to the Equity 2020 advisory team. So I just wanted to note that. And again, if you do nothing, that is an option. As I said, that's something you can consider. But as we've seen in at least the last 2 budget cycles, we've had to subsidize small schools. We weren't able to fully do that in the past budget cycle. We've cut 300 positions over the past 2 years, so you could cut more positions. I want to give credit again to the HFT and the school safety officers who have helped us with some of our ongoing costs in taking a wage freeze over the next year, but that's not the entire cost of our increasing costs that we see each year, so you can make programmatic decisions. We were able to maintain art, music, PE, social workers in every school. Are you going to be able to do that? And again, this isn't entirely about money, but it is about reallocating resources. The pie is not getting any bigger. As our CFO has a great analogy. She says, if you bake a pie at Thanksgiving for 20 people and 100 people show up, well, they're going to have pretty small portions of that pie. And that's what we're facing now, right? The pie is not increasing. It's one pie, is getting smaller. So you'll just have to make some hard choices about how you allocate resources, and also the facilities issue is real, as you know. And again, as I said in my opening, the city's bond rating again was downgraded. It's not looking like we're going to be able to pick up renovation projects besides Weaver anytime soon. So maintaining the buildings, attending to the condition, attending to students, attending half-empty, crumbling buildings. So, you can do nothing, it's just you're gonna have to make some other choices about allocating resources.
So about that point, I mean, I think, I understand what you're saying. You're saying there's buildings that won't get fixed and so on and so forth. But I think, what also troubles me about this kind of logic is like, if we don't do anything, it's all gonna fall apart. I think that kind of, what it does is it releases people from responsibility at this table to make sure that the schools are actually functioning and kind of in working order. And that's not on one individual, it's as a board, but this is a mayoral board, right? And so the mayor, the most powerful person in the city, has appointed people to this board to represent him in his interest. And what I'm hearing from the folks at this table is that, well, we can't do anything about it. Buildings are just gonna fall apart. We don't have any money. And I think that's a complete, like, just evasion of responsibility to what we have to do in terms of the school system. And I think that to me, that's a problematic line of reasoning. The other thing I'll add is, I'm kind of concerned about the people that are involved in some of the kind of implementation of this thing. So you mentioned the CFO, for instance, and I don't typically call people out, but where has the CFO been in saying, we shouldn't be opening all these new schools, we shouldn't be doing all this stuff? Let's be real, right? There's a lot of people that have been going along with this, that work in the school system, that haven't given us good advice. And now we're putting them in a position to like lead us out of the mess. I think that has to be dealt with, and people need to think about whether or not we're getting good advice from people that work in the school district. I'll wrap up with just another kind of question. So I have my list, so give me a sec.
The CFO did actually call this out as part of the transition report and really raised the red flag about the need to attend to
That was
it.
2 years ago. What about the 10 years before that, right? Let's be real. Let's be real here. Let's be like 100% real about about the last 10 years, okay?
If I can interject while he's looking for his next question.
Go for it.
The other, just to elaborate to the point, what the community is concerned about is if we have, we're spending $24 to $20 million in transportation, that is possibly where you can find or access the resource or additional resource or leverage those funds to program and things of that nature. So I guess that's why we're talking about some, not 5 neighborhood options as it exists in a small, I don't even know the square mileage of Wish, Waverly, Clark, and Sand, but they're like just blocks away from one another. So, I understand, we understand that there should be some kind of consolidation or closure or movement, but how do we reduce transportation costs so we can reinvest in programming, I think, and so that's all I just wanted to add.
Along that point, I mean, I think, moving forward, what I'm not convinced about is, I'm not convinced that there's anything, that this is like an improvement. So let's say, for instance, that we were to close 3 schools, and I won't name them because I won't do more damage that's already been done, but let's say we were to close 3 schools. What's to say that whatever savings comes from that is to go to other schools, right? What's to say that, $10 million is saved, and that $10 million is then reallocated to some other school, and they get what they need at another school? I don't have any guarantee of that, right? What if the mayor says, I'll take that 10 million and I'll put it somewhere else in my budget gap, right? Which is what's happened over the last several years. So I think that's one thing that I'm curious about. I think the other thing is that, what are some other alternatives, right? There's alternatives that haven't been explored. Could we move the Board of Education from out of a rented space into a space that we own, for instance? Merging of schools doesn't necessarily have to mean you move one school to the next. It could also mean we don't have 4 principals in one building, like this one. Right? Those are some things that we could do that include merging, but you don't have to necessarily move people. I think it's the last thing, and this is getting back to you guys, and this is my final point. I remembered, thank you, is the this idea, I was a little concerned about the way that you guys did academic rankings. You guys probably use status level achievement data, right? So like what percentage of kids were at a particular level. I don't know if you used that or a scale score or whatever you used. You certainly didn't use some sort of growth measure, right?
Right, no, it was levels on Smarter Balance for elementary and middle.
Right, so we know, like social scientists know, that that's very highly correlated to race, class, ethnicity, language, et cetera, right? And so what you've done is you've pretty much like stack ranked our schools by all those different levels of advantage, right? And so you've basically picked out the least advantaged schools in some ways here, right? That people have decided they don't want to go there, they don't want their kids to go there, whatever. And now you're saying, on top of that, you're the least advantaged, now we're going to close you and disperse you. So that's one thing. And the second thing, I think, is just in your assumptions, what you haven't accounted for is that, Burns Latino Studies, kids may be getting a great education there. They may be coming from another country, and they don't know English right off the jump, right? And so they may be making progress over time, and that's not accounted here. So you might close that school, disperse those kids to some other school that doesn't have the capacity, the capability to serve those students. And that's what's not accounted for here, because you're going to disperse those kids in this plan. They go to Parkville, and maybe they don't have that bilingual teacher at Parkville. Maybe she or he goes somewhere else, right? Maybe they don't have the reading program that they had that was making a difference in their life, right? So, and I guess what I'm saying is, like, in your idea of like quality seats, you've kind of confused like these kind of status level indicators of testing with whether or not the kids are getting a good education or not, which is not indicated by the test scores all the time. And so that's something that we have to think about, I think, as a group, because, and I'm not saying like that's the way that you guys did it, that's the matrix that you have, that's what a lot of people do, but we could be doing more damage by closing a Burns or closing an MLK or closing a Milner than we realize, because we're just looking at those test results and the utilization rate, right? Utilization rate's not going to tell you that at Milner, the kids' parents can come and use the laundromat at the school. It's not going to tell you that, right? They may have a 60% utilization rate, but the parents may get what they need, kind of to what Julio was saying earlier to some extent. So I think, and I think this gets to what Tiffany was saying a little bit earlier, is like, we got to think about schools, not necessarily about percentages of like where the kids are and like whatnot. So that's what I think, like, overall is my last point to you. And I'll take a look at what you guys send in terms of the utilization stuff, your assumptions and that sort of thing. But I think, how do we account for that stuff, I think, is like my final question to you guys, is like, kids may be getting a great education, maybe not, I don't know. But this isn't necessarily telling me that. And it doesn't necessarily show, whether or not we're kind of providing those services to kids there. And maybe some other schools just don't have the capacity to do that, right? You certainly wouldn't send Burns kids, 50% emergent bilingual kids, you wouldn't send them to Avon, all of them, all together, and say, here you guys go, you got a high quality seat in Avon. It might work, it might be a good choice for them, but it might not, right? So we have to be careful about that.
Again, I'll just jump in because I'm not sure you can speak to all the things that, Robert, you're absolutely right. The assessment scores definitely are only one indicator and do not represent the totality of a child's education. I just want to point out two things about that. That it's the reason that we also put the free and reduced lunch indicator. That was always the intent and what the group asked for. Don't just show performance because it doesn't tell the whole story, but make sure you show some indicator of need. Again, that's not the total indicator of need, but again, just trying to line that up. The other thing is putting the conditions of buildings, I think, is very telling. And it's very telling in that you see some of our schools with the greatest needs, with some of the persistently lowest performance, and this isn't in every case, but in most cases are in the buildings in the poorest conditions. And I just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, I'm good. Thank you, Superintendent.
Yeah, sure.
Other questions? All right, we stand adjourned.